Are you thinking about making a podcast? Spotify has a platform that lets you make one, and if I can figure it out, you definitely can too. You can create your own content all in one place for free with zero hangups and even earn money as soon as you get started. Spotify lets you record and edit episodes from your phone or computer so you can go mobile, just like I enjoy to do. My favorite thing about it is that you can create video episodes if you wish and upload them to wherever podcasts are heard. You can even set up subscriptions or, if you're like me, listener support options for listeners to help you grow. I 10 out of 10 recommend the Spotify for Podcasters app. Or, why don't you just step over to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started on your own podcast. If you like what we do here at Off the Deep End and wish to support us, the best thing you can do is to share it on your social media, but also you can tell your mother, sister, cousin, auntie, the kid that's walking by you down the street, your gym crush, anybody about the episode you're listening to and why you liked it. There's also another way to support us, and it's to go to the link posted in the description and on our Facebook page. And when you become a subscriber, you'll have access to subscriber-only content and ad-free listening for every single episode we put out. No matter what you choose to do, I do greatly appreciate you for tapping in, and please do reach out to our Facebook page so we can chat. Tell us what you feel, what you think, what you don't like, what I could improve upon. At the end of the day, this is meant to be a conversation starter. And just to be completely open and honest, every single penny that goes to the Off the Deep End program with subscribers is going to help other people by spreading the word via ads or getting new microphones so we can have more people at a time. And I really do appreciate every single listener. So thank you so much. I hope you have a great day and don't pass the pain. Hey, everybody. The episode you're about to listen to is the first of the series called Domestic Violence. I couldn't find anybody who is a better shining example of what a strong woman looks like post their abusive situation and after they've left it. Not only does Kerry go out of her way to make sure that even people who are in abusive situations know that they're not alone. They do have resources to reach out to, and that when they're ready, they can do it. Not only does she offer great training in the firearm industry, not only does she do great mindset training, which is where self-defense starts, but she's also a mother, an American, and a great human being. And I cannot be more excited to share this with you. Thank you so much for listening as always. And do be warned, we are going to be covering some very, very emotional topics. And if you've experienced domestic violence in the past, as I have, I hope that this doesn't cause a trigger for you. So this is a general warning. If you're still struggling with this severely, this might cause you to go through some things. So thank you for tapping in Off the Deep End, and let's get straight into this. Awesome. So thank you, Miss Kerry, so much for joining us today. I really love what you did yesterday. It was definitely worth this, more than a drive. It was worth the hours I spent listening and the experience. And it was quite an emotional thing to be able to sit there in the room with you, having these people listening to you with complete intent of gathering as much information and wisdom from you as possible. So I have a lot of people asking me already what your story is, because I've been sharing your post for a while. Everybody's been asking me, who is this We the Female? Do you go shooting with her? Like, what's the secret? Like, so can you tell me a little bit about your story?
I can. Thank you for having me on, and I appreciate that you took the time to drive out yesterday to sit in my defensive mindset seminar. So thank you for that as well. Mm-hmm. So I'm a domestic violence survivor, and 4 years ago there was a law that passed in Washington State, I-1639. Some people will be familiar with it. It actually made national news, because at the time when it passed, it was considered one of the most restrictive gun laws in the country, and it was very celebrated. The initiative was presented just a few weeks after the Parkland shooting, and it had a bunch of stuff in it, and they marketed it on safe storage and extended background checks and stuff. So it sounded really good, on the surface to the average voter, I guess. So what was in it that a lot of people didn't realize was in it is that when you now sign your 4473, which is the background check form, the NICS federal background check form done by the FBI, that it's an automatic waiver of your medical record. And an individual can be denied the purchase of a firearm based on what is found in their medical record. But here's the rub. They don't tell you what their criteria is for what they're going to approve or deny. They don't tell you who the health authority is that makes these decisions. It's completely arbitrary. And I spoke out about it, explaining how such a law could prevent me, and not just me, but countless other people, and particularly women, how it can deny us the ability to be able to purchase a firearm to protect ourselves from our abusers. Mm. And at the time, my ex we didn't know where he was, and he had been stalking me. He had stopped at that point as well, as far as I've known, because we didn't know where he was. But everybody was mortified. I can't believe that. I'm so sorry. And I said, well, you didn't read the bill. Well, we read it. I'm like, no, you didn't. No, you didn't read the bill, because if you had, that was one of the few things in that piece of legislation that was very clear cut and easy to read. So it went viral. And here I am 4 years later, started We the Female, the nonprofit. And obviously, you know where I'm at now.
Absolutely. Yes. I understand that any legislation passed, it only applies usually to people who actually follow the law. It actually restricts the rights of law-abiding citizens. Criminals, right. It's kind of in the name, crime and all. They do all the things that are crime related. They don't really obey these laws. So all it does is ultimately restrict the rights of men and women in the United States of America.
Exactly.
And that can be extremely frustrating to have to deal with. So
yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry about that. So you started going into talking to people, or what was it? Was it some existential calling saying, listen, you need to use your voice. You're already viral. You're already a person who's experienced severe treatment horribly on the one side of the law. What was it for you?
Well, I think it was all of that, honestly. I think when you get to that point, you're finally sitting in a position where you're looking at that going, okay, obviously it went viral. And then I had some idea in my head that I wanted to help women in some capacity. I wasn't quite sure how. When I retired, I own a day spa. I've been in the beauty industry for 30 years. And I kind of was leaning toward some sort of self-defense or firearm training or something, but really at the end of the day, I wasn't sure. I was actually, honestly, still kind of waffling about providing microloans for domestic violence survivors, for small businesses when they were ready to get back on their feet. But this is just the direction I was pulled. So I guess you could call it a calling. Because once I set forth doing this and I registered the 501c3, everything just kind of fell into place, and doors just kept opening and doors kept opening for me to be heard. And I think that what made it so different was that my voice is not something that's typically out there. There's a lot of great advocates, and let me be clear, there's a lot of great advocates. There's some very good advocates that are domestic violence survivors. But there was just something about the way that I teach or the way I approach it that just hits differently. And it's been heard, and it's been very well received in and out of the gun industry and the gun community, or Second Amendment community, I should say. And I'm very grateful for that, because it's putting a different perspective. It's providing a different perspective for people that typically would blindly support gun control laws, that without understanding what kind of negative impact they can actually have on individuals, but particularly on females, and of course, specifically domestic violence survivors.
Absolutely. Well, so I was watching, it was kind of this crazy emotional moment in my household. And it's one of the things that's probably going to live with me forever. I came across you when I was scrolling around on YouTube, and I was like, honey, you have to show you this video. As soon as she was able to, for us to link up throughout the day, and I put it up on the big screen, cranked up the audio all the way. And it was you speaking in front of, I don't know how many thousands of people were there, but in front of definitely a large crowd.
Yeah. There's a few thousand.
A few thousand, right? I get really big stage fright, so that's probably not anything I'm going to do ever, but hopefully one day, maybe. But your message was very, very clear. You started off saying, when I'm sitting up here, I look like this giant symbol of strength, of I'm very passionate about the Second Amendment. You're not going to see um, the things I've experienced. You're not going to see what lives underneath this skin, the scars that don't get shown.
Yeah.
What do you say to somebody when you first encounter them? Because I know you do this a lot, and talked about receiving a lot of messages. What do you say to somebody who is another survivor and doesn't know what resources to find or how to start?
That's very hard, especially since survivors themselves don't particularly come out directly looking for resources.
Mm.
Usually it's others I have found that come to me looking for resources to help somebody they suspect is or know is a victim. And that I would love to be able to change that. That being said, I'm limited in what I can do. I'm not a shelter. I'm not an outreach center for everything that an abuse victim needs, because it's a lot more than just what I provide. That being said, first and foremost, whether it's me or anyone else, if someone reaches out to you and they tell you that they're in this situation, or they usually won't come out right out and say it, they'll allude to it or something. First and foremost, you want to ask if they're safe. Make sure they're in a safe space, or they're in a safe environment currently. And then you just kind of, you can't really tell people. I mean, you can't tell really anyone what to do, but particularly with survivors or victims, you just have to be a resource for them until they're ready to come to you and say, I'm ready to leave, and what is it that I need to do? Because if you try to push them or prod them, you'll end up losing communication with them, because you have to understand that victims still believe that it's their fault when they're being abused. They've been convinced for weeks, months, years even, that the reason that they're being abused, whether mentally or physically or whatever, is their fault. And if you push too hard, it will only make them retreat, because then they won't trust you, because then they're afraid you're going to call the cops, or they're afraid, or something to this effect. And this is where we get a lot of comments where you see people, particularly men, probably overwhelmingly more men than women, making statements like, well, you must like it if you stay, or, maybe you should choose better men, or, these types of things, because they really don't understand what the dynamic looks like for a victim in the situation, but also working to try to get out of the situation. That being said, typically the men that say that, usually it's an indication that they're abusers themselves. Mm. They're bitter and salty in a lot of cases, because the woman in their life has figured that out and has left them. And they're pissed off and still blaming women for it. So typically when you see anything like that, or the men get abused too, or, anything like this to make it about them, that's usually an indication that they're abusers themselves. Not always, but more often than not, that's been the case. So I know it can be incredibly frustrating, and I tell people this all the time. If you suspect, or someone in your life is in an abusive situation, the best thing you can do is just to be there and support them and let them gain your trust. And when they're ready, they'll come to you. And that's unfortunately about all you can do. You can't really force the issue.
Mm-hmm. Also, because you don't want their abuser to catch wind of it and make things harder for them as well.
Absolutely, because that you'll make that even worse on her.
So, when I was watching another one of your videos, you were talking to one of your instructees, someone who is learning from you at one of your shooting events that you do, and I loved your approach. So what differentiates your approach versus the standard approach that I got from my military instructors, which was not very good at all, or the average, NRA, hey, this is a old school pistol, check it out. Like, what sets you apart from them?
Well, I mean, I can't speak for every instructor that's out there. I'm sure that there's some other really great instructors that know how to work with women from a psychological aspect, but for me personally, being in the business of the beauty industry for 30 years, I like to kind of reference to, I really was in the business of women for 30 years. When you sit across from them every 2 weeks, every week, you really start to learn who they are. But more importantly, you learn how to ask questions to get information out of them that, when you're on a range, can be relevant to how receptive they are to training, how they learn, what type of everybody learns differently. So you'll get that. If there had been any trauma that had happened, you can watch for indicators, and if they're hiding it or not, maybe don't even remember it. I had one student, one case, she didn't even relate her experience, negative experience with guns as a child, to why she was having anxiety, shooting for the first time on the range. So I stopped her, asked questions and got that information out. And once she realized it and had that cathartic moment, then she was able to shoot and it was fine. So one of the things that I focus on is really listening to the student. And it's not just about telling, and there's nothing wrong, let me be clear, because there's a lot of good teachers out there, and when they tell their students when they get nervous, just take a breath, this is the situation, it's going to be okay. Women are, particularly in an industry where it's male dominated, can be intimidating for them learning how to shoot, if they've never shot or they've had some bad experience. And it's not always abuse. It can be that that dad gave them a 44 Magnum when they were 8 years old to shoot and didn't teach them how to do it, and they fall on their rear ends or something. So it's not always it's not always that they were abused. Sometimes they just had negative experiences, or if they're older, they're from a generation, or actually not even older. I've stumbled across this even in 20-year-old girls that, we don't care. I don't care again. My boyfriend handles it or my husband handles it. So for whatever their reasons are, they've got trepidation around the firearm. When you can show them a lot of patience and listen to them, it makes a big difference. Additionally, women are very detail oriented, and they want to know the whys, not just the hows, when operating anything really, but particularly a firearm. And it can be intimidating to talk to a man about that, because men are very point A to point B, whereas women want to, well, there's A, but there's A, point one, and there's A point two, but why is A point two relate to A point one before they get to B? And so sometimes we have to work them through that process to help them understand, to get where they need to be, to have that confidence. And it can be incredibly frustrating for them. For example, one of the things that I find that my students have the most challenge with is locking the slide back on their firearm. And they become very frustrated. And there's a lot of, I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't do it. But they can. And a lot of instructors just either do it for them, or they move past it, or they tell me you can work on it later, or whichever. And we've spent up to 35 minutes of our range time doing nothing but helping women learn how to lock back the slide on their gun, because it's a fundamental safety feature that they need, or safety operation that they need to know. But above and beyond that, helping them work through it and watching them actually be able to do it now gives them confidence that they typically wouldn't have, to be able to move forward with the other steps. So it's really a psychological game. And I think that's the long answer. I think the short answer is I focus more on the psychological game of learning than a lot of instructors do. I think that would be the short answer for you.
Okay. Well, nothing wrong with long answers at all. So that's one thing I've experienced as well. It was difficult for me as a husband. I do have some experience with firearms, not as much as you or some other USCA instructors, but I do have some experience, and me trying to convey that to my partner, to try to help them feel comfortable and safe. I don't always have all the answers. And guys, you absolutely said it right. We are A to B guys naturally. We are fixers. We're not always feelers. We're not always think this through. A lot of guys that I know in my life struggle with this, specifically as instructors, and it's leadership 101. You have to change your approach sometimes. Right. So I definitely think that the way you present things is going to be different than other instructors, because I've had horrible instructors and it led me to developing bad habits as well. And that's something you cannot have. Right. And you're totally right about the slide. doing tapping racks is essential when you have a gun malfunction and need to clear it. So, what does your nonprofit do? I know you talked about it a little bit in the class. I love going to your website and it's all right there. But just for the listeners, what do you do personally as a nonprofit organization for especially women?
So I do a few different. We the female has a few different hats that we wear, all in the same style, though, I guess, if you could say. So we offer outreach and education regarding gun law and policy to help those that may support those gun law and policy to understand how that can negatively impact a woman's ability to defend herself. Mm. One of the primary things we do is help women and that's the class that you were in, our defensive mindset class, which is kind of the core of We the Female. And that helps us, helps women understand very tangibly. And as you know, because you saw the class, I have a lot of examples of what's going on. And to say, okay, this is what's happening around you right now. And then I show them some of the actual policy, some of the law that has been passed or ruled on, even by Supreme Court, showing that law enforcement is either, it's being cut, the funding is being cut, they're not getting to you in time, and they have no legal obligation to defend you. And I actually put some of the actual cases in my classes. So even though they can see that on the internet or whichever, and we assume that in the gun community industry, self-defense industry community, that people already assume this, but they forget that the gun industry and community only talk to 1% of gun owners. It's kind of a myopic view, and so a lot of people don't know these things, and they just assume that people do. So we help them understand, in short, nobody's coming to save you, and you've got to learn how to save yourself. And so the class, for example, that you were in, that sat in yesterday, was how to just get their mind around the idea of knowing that they need to embrace self-defense. And that doesn't always mean that they need to just go out and buy a gun. It starts with the mind and setting your mind in a different headspace, that you are going to start living your life differently so that you can always be in a position to protect yourself and your family when you need to. And so that's the core of what we do. And that is obviously outreach into the community that tends to lend more towards supporting, focusing on people that also support gun control law. Whereas on the other side, one of the other hats that we tend to wear is helping, or trying to help, this one's actually a little harder, interestingly enough, is more that conservative leaning side or pro-gun side, understand that every time you leave a crappy comment, or you say something dumb, or you act dumb or chauvinistic or whichever, or in some cases the women that there's some women in the industry and community and just in every aspect of life really, that feel like they've got to compete with men, and so they can say stupid stuff sometimes too. And our goal is to have them understand, look, if you want us arming women, if you want us to help women, women looking for resources for self-defense, when they see that stuff, they're not going to say, oh, that guy, Eddie's an a-hole, so we don't want, we don't want to deal with, him. They're going to say those gun people or those self-defense people are a-holes. And so I'm a passionate believer in freedom of speech. Let me be clear, free speech is more important than people's feelings. And I'm big on that. My thing is, I want people to understand that while you're allowed to say it, understand that there are consequences. And in some cases, those consequences keep me from being able to reach women to help to get them in a mindset to start learning how to defend themselves. And then I became a firearms instructor out of necessity. There was only a couple of instructors in the area in Washington that I'm from, and they were NRA instructors. So a lot of women didn't want to go to them simply for that reason. I'm just going to be really honest about that. And then at the time, they weren't teaching. So I became a certified instructor and didn't think I would really do much with it, honestly. And then ended up teaching a lot. Crime was going up. Women are seeing this, and that's not getting any better. So it really ended up filling a void that existed in my area.
Wow, that's amazing. I think people who rise to the occasion and step in when someone needs to. We don't have enough of them in the world, and I've watched it. I've been in grocery stores while someone's being followed, and I tell, or and they someone tries to tell one of the employees, "Hey, this
Yeah.
person's being followed." Like, oh, it's not my job. Well, you know
Right.
what? And me as an armed citizen, as a person who has a heart, who cares about other people, I have no problem making sure this person gets to their car. Okay, I have no problem
Yeah.
harassing this individual who is absolutely a potential threat and puts zip ties on car doors or puts
Yeah.
pieces of paper underneath the windshield. And my
Yeah.
wife doesn't have an issue with that either. She's super great. She always comes home, tell me a story, honey. You would not believe this shit. And I always admire people who do stuff like that. So
I do
thank you for
well.
doing that.
And thank you for doing that. We need to be able to, look out for each other a little bit more. And it's unfortunate we've become a society that is either too focused on recording a tragedy to be famous, or they don't want to get involved because they think it's going to get them in trouble. And I
I've seen it.
take
Ugh.
the chance get in trouble because you may save somebody's life.
Absolutely. And working in Seattle, that's something I've had to deal with. I've seen way too many people die in front of me, and it's absolutely ridiculous. I watch people hold out phones while people are ODing.
Yeah.
There's a lot, or just getting stabbed. People get stabbed and they pull out a phone to record it.
Yeah.
When there's like a victim laying on the street, you're just gonna record their death. Like
Yeah.
I think I don't know if it's tied into narcissism or just weakness as a society where they think that we should celebrate or just try to be famous. Try to be famous.
Yeah.
Oh, I got this many views of somebody getting hurt instead of giving them my jacket and trying to stop the bleeding. Um,
That's exactly what it is. And that goes back to, I call it violence porn.
hmm,
When people share, on social media, you'll see people share a lot of like really violent videos and stuff. And they do it because it gets them likes and reposts and this and that and others. So, and people, it's already been proven, people get addicted to that, to the attention that they get. And so I don't share stuff like that unless there is, well, and even less now, but I share it. But unless there's a really good lesson to be learned and I can use it as an educational talking point, I won't share violence porn videos. I just won't. I think that it hurts a lot of people involved, and it continues to perpetuate the detachment of violence to empathy in our world. And I was always really good about it, but I think what really hit hard for me, even more so, was in 2020 during the most peaceful protests. um, there was I saw this video of a guy who gets shot point blank right in the heart, and he falls backwards and dies. And I thought, God, that's awful. And 2 hours later, I found out it was a very good friend of mine, and it was Jay Danielson from Portland. And we all know about that case.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Oh, thanks. So it was hard, right? It was hard to watch to begin with, but then I found out it was my friend, and it was just devastating. And so while I was never big on sharing the violence porn to begin with, that really sent it in a different direction because, there you go. There's a great example. I was seeing it from somebody from the East Coast that was posting it, and it was my friend who lived 2.5 hours from me. So you don't know whose lives you could be affecting with that, out there, and they may not know. Like nobody had a chance to tell me he had died yet. So you could be putting somebody's death out there and somebody seeing it and them not even knowing it until later. You know what I mean? I don't know if that makes any sense, but
It definitely
so
does.
that just really solidified that for me, and making sure that I don't do that. So unless there's a really good self-defense lesson that can be involved with it, I won't share that anymore. So that's a big thing that I really hope that more people start thinking about and taking away.
Well, it's definitely going to add some perspective to and help me quell that feeling too, to try to combat that. So when I go out with my obviously I leave armed, right? I'm going out in
Mhm.
town. I'm just doing my thing separate from my family. And there's a lot of guys I talk to, and they're like, "Oh man, my wife doesn't need to carry. I got it." And I ask them, I say, "Hey, bro, are you with your wife right now?
Mm-hmm.
Are you around your kids? Are you around your
Right.
dog? Are you at your home? No, you're
Yeah.
not. Why would you
Yeah.
want to keep that idea of self defense, of a defensive mindset? Why would you keep that to yourself? And it's a horrible thing to do, for especially for guys. Like that whole ego, that man ego thing, it can get, once you bruise it, they get all upset. But it's the honest to God truth. You can't sit there and be an advocate for self defense, for being a two-way advocate,
Right.
and have that alpha male mentality at the same time. They don't go hand in hand. You have to humble yourself.
Yeah, because one of the best things you can do to show that you are that caregiver, and that, that leader of your family, is to help your wife, your girlfriend, whichever, your family members, embrace self-defense and teach them how to protect themselves.
Absolutely. So sitting in your class, there was this moment that stood out to me the most. Um, Obviously, I was one of the only, like, when you hear the word "we the female," a lot of guys aren't like, "Yeah, let me get on that." For me, it was actually like the polar opposite. I was like, "Wow, this is really interesting. I don't see enough of this. I don't see a lot of this. We don't have a lot of people advocating for getting women involved in their own self defense, because as guys, like I just said, we're not always there, and having the crazy ideology that supports us being this protective thing, this protective force, a lot of times we're not around. So
Right.
it's absolutely ridiculous. But one of the moments really stood out to me. You said, "Raise your hand if you've ever been a victim of domestic violence,"
Oh, and I
and
had them all stand up.
you had them all stand up, and
Yeah.
because yeah, and seeing people, everyone in the, like almost everybody in the whole room. It was over 55 people that I counted. Over, I would say about at least 53 of them stood up,
Yeah.
and there was this moment, and it was quite a beautiful thing, where they looked around next to them, and you could tell they were very, very insecure and nervous when they stood up. But as they looked around and saw that they weren't the only ones standing up, this overwhelming look of safety, this security blanket kind of fell over them.
Yeah.
And I tried. I'm not gonna be a liar. I get really emotional at things like that, so I had to hold back a couple tears. But seeing the look on these women's faces when they noticed that
Yeah.
they weren't the only one who went through it was a really emotional, and I would call it a cornerstone moment of your talk. What what per, what gives you the inspiration to say things like that? What does it do for you as a speaker, and how does it affect them, in your opinion?
Well, I, being a survivor and knowing the statistics and how high they are, I understand how alone you can feel in those situations, especially in a room full of other women that you've been hiding information. You've been women. When you're abused, you hide that information, and some women will leave their abusers, and some will talk about it and be very vocal, and some will not. But even if we leave and we talk about it, sometimes we're still blamed. It's still our fault, or and whether other people are blaming us, but we legitimately will still continue to blame ourselves. In a lot of cases, I did, months after I had left, in the last episode where he had beaten me, my ex. Um, but so one of the things I have come to find is that when women find themselves in a room full of other people that have gone through a similar experience, it validates them. And women in general like to be validated. We all like to be validated, not just women. We all like to be validated and to know that we matter. But especially for abuse victims, it really matters because they feel like they're being heard. And more often than not, abuse victims don't feel like they're heard, or survivors. And so for me, I started doing that, knowing that at least half my room would always stand up, but usually it's more. And like you saw last night, there were a couple that didn't, but they were doing, they were kind of hunching down and looking around, and which their body language indicated to me that I think that they were probably either, my guess, probably still in their situation.
Mm. And they're not
And
ready to come out of that.
correct. And it hit a little hard. In fact, I got to thinking about one gal in particular because I didn't mean to look at her directly. It just happened when I looked in that direction. When I saw one of them still sitting down, and I said, "Yeah, I see that some are still sitting down, and that, and chances are you're probably in that situation too, and that's okay, or you were." I said, "That's okay. You don't have to stand up." So, and then I think she left early, so it might have just, because sometimes that happens. It can be too intense, especially if they're still in the situation. So, um, but, and not every woman has been abused or anything, but some women, all women at some point have experienced some sort of sexual harassment,
Hmm.
based on today's, what we understand about consent and so on. um and some blow things up bigger than they need to. I mean, that's a whole rabbit hole, another podcast. But um, 1 in 3 women will experience some sort of abuse in their lifetime, and whether that's, and most people think that abuse is physical, but more often than not, it's verbal and it's psychological. And that's why you noticed how they first started standing up. And when I said whether it's verbal, I said you don't have to be hit to be a survivor. Then did you see how many more people stood up,
Yeah,
or
absolutely.
women stood up? Yeah. So and that's a big one. That is a big validation, because we are dismissed that that's not abuse. You just need to toughen up. You need to get over it, especially in the self-defense world. Well, you can't just live in being a victim. Well, you're right, but you also have to be able to be acknowledged, validated, and heard before you can work through it, so that you can reclaim yourself, so that you will not be a victim again.
Absolutely.
And that's a huge problem in the self-defense community. Huge problem.
Does DV just apply to people? Because obviously, I'm not an expert in this. Does DV just apply to people who are you're in a relationship with, or is it extend past that?
No, it's, well, I mean, there is workplace verbal abuse and things that does happen as well. Domestic abuse also encompasses parent to child abuse, obviously child abuse, but also child to parent. There's some of that going on, and yes, I get it. For those haters out there, they're going to listen to this. You can just shut up and sit down. But the reality is that, yes, a lot of it may have to do with parenting, but sometimes, just like, you can't sit there and say, well, it's all parenting. They just need their asses whooped, and then turn around and be the same person that says, you know, well, the bad guy's going to get the gun, whether he was raised right or wrong. Well, it's kind of the same thing. Sometimes things just aren't wired right, and kids can be, kind of loose cannons. So, um, and they can be abusive to their parents. So
Mm.
that is encompassing, the umbrella term domestic abuse actually encompasses any sort of abuse that happens among partners or family inside of a home or domestic living situation. But there's boyfriend abuse, elder abuse. Elder abuse often comes from either, their children neglecting them, or in a home, or, retirement center or something like that. And then there is workplace abuse.
Okay. Yeah, I have friends who have personally experienced work DV in the military, especially, and it's
Oh
rampant. Sexual
yeah,
assault is rampant in the military, and
huge.
it's heartbreaking. We watched the news unravel at the idea of sexual assault being a real thing with the Fort Hood incidents, when that's been going
Right.
on for so long. Um, yeah, Miss Vanessa, it was tough to hear that story and to see everything unravel around it, on all
Yeah.
the witnesses losing their lives randomly after it. It was really frustrating for me, because I've had to deal with some of my sailors being sexually assaulted, and them not wanting to file a to official cases. I've been a protector to some of them, and
Yeah.
it's difficult to be in a spot where you want to do something, but you know that taking action compromises their feeling of security, and you need to ultimately meet your, if you want to protect somebody, you have to make sure you're checking all their boxes.
Yeah. And it also, it's, for them, they're terrified of retaliation from, the other sailors, or, soldiers, or what have you. um and that is prevalent, that is a huge thing. And they feel like they might lose professional opportunities or advancement opportunities. There's a lot of issues with that, um that happen, and that's a frustrating situation for sure. I mean, that's incredibly frustrating, and it pisses me off, and it's a very limited. And the military themselves, quite frankly, to be fair, this is speaking from my personal experience many years ago, so I don't know if it's gotten better or worse or what have you. But my husband was recently retired from the military, so he said that the way that they had handled it had changed. But the commands that he had been in, I don't know what that looks like. He was a senior officer when he retired. But when in my abuse situation, now mind you, I wasn't active duty, but I have the impression that it all kind of went down the same way. They didn't want to help me at all because my abuser was active duty at the time and he was getting ready to be pushed out actually. And because of that, they were going to sweep it under the rug
Mm.
and not deal with it until it came time to call me for family services, whatever, to call me so that they could get my story for their statistics.
That is
And I
absolutely
told them,
horrible.
I told them F off. And I'm sure that that probably happens with a lot of these women. In fact, one of the lieutenants at that time, so this was years ago with my abuser, I literally stood right in front of me in black and white, and these two officers were sitting there staring at me, and they're like, "Well, you know, this is what we're doing," and so on and so forth. This was at his arraignment, and then I went home, and I'm on the phone with him because my ex kept harassing me. I'm like, "You guys gonna do something about this?" And they're really evasive, and he was like, "Well, my hands are tied." I'm trying to recall things that happened years ago. And, you know, I get that like, there's procedure, right? Everything's procedure in the military. But finally, I just said, "Do you have a daughter, sir? Do you have a daughter?" He was an O3. He says, "Yes, I do." I said, "How would you feel if she called you because her ex had just beat the hell out of her? And then the abuser was, you know, the officer was protecting him. You know what I'm trying to say?" And he goes, "Well, I wouldn't like that at all." And he went real quiet.
Yeah.
Real quiet. That conversation shifted quick. And interestingly enough, he would never return my calls after that.
And that's absolutely pathetic. I've experienced a lot of similar failures, complete failures. A lot of people wouldn't want to investigate it, and so me, as I was put in a leadership role when I was really young, maybe too young by some standards, and a lot of people told me that, but I didn't care. At
Mm-hmm.
the end of the day, I had a little girl, someone's daughter, came to me and said she was sexually assaulted, or another
Mm-hmm.
time I caught bruises on one of my sailors' arms.
Right.
And if the military doesn't want to do anything about it, it if I felt like it weighed on my shoulders and it had to come to the point where I needed to step up. I had a good friend of mine who was in the SAPR program, sexual assault prevention
Yeah.
and response, and they did a great job handling it. We made it sure I took time out of my day, me and the other young people in leadership, the E4s and the bosun mate division type stuff, and deck department of the Navy, the best department out there, by the way. We look out for our sailors. We don't view people as our subordinates. We look at them as a piece of our family. So this is my niece, my nephew, or whatever. I knew I had to step up and make it serious. So we stood watch. We made sure that she was always protected. And this guy did come around, and we had a lot of good, healthy conversations with
Yeah.
him from heights about the dangers and repercussions of harming our sailors. So ultimately, he was processed out of the Navy, thankfully, because someone finally did their job, and I had to go to the EO. So there are, like,
Yeah.
just like the government, there are the checks and balances system. So if
Yeah.
the SAPR guys aren't doing it or your command isn't doing it, then you can go to the equal opportunity advisors and file a complete report on your entire command for failing you as a sailor. And so I made multiple, there was a lot of different investigations. I got in a lot of altercations in the military. I almost got sent to captain's mass over protecting my sailors because I refused to allow my superiors, quote unquote, to keep this encouraging this behavior. I wasn't for it.
Yeah.
Did
I don't talk about the military side of that a lot, like because I've told my story on and on and on. I've not that particular. I talk about how the system itself failed me, and how the law enforcement officers told me that once he was arraigned, the day I was there at his arraignment, and they told me to hide. You know, do you have a place that you can go for 3 or 4 days because the opportunity for violence is going to escalate after you know after the release from jail. I talk about that quite a bit. I talk about the prosecutor dropping the charges from felony to misdemeanor so that they could be negotiated into a plea bargain for a diversion agreement. But I don't know that I've ever really talked about the military. It's just not. I felt like relevant to the. Maybe I have now. I'm thinking about it because I remember talking about how the military system failed me as well as the justice system, maybe once or twice. But I don't. It's just not something I've talked about a whole lot. Just not come up. But you being, I think, active duty or at one point active duty probably helped with that. But yeah, it's amazing how deep the corruption's not the right word, but how badly broken the whole system is. And it's not just the justice system. I know that the military has been working diligently to try to fix some of this with sexual assault and things. But at the end of the day, I think that there's still a lot of covering it up. And in my case, it was just because they didn't want the paperwork. or to deal with him anymore because he was already on his way out. So why bother, putting ourselves through all of this and putting him through captain's mass and all this if he's going to be gone anyway.
And that's pathetic. It's a lack of diligence. Our women are worth it. Our young men are worth it as well, and
Yeah.
ultimately, our neighbors are worth it because when you're in the military, you have to remember that eventually these people go home.
Right.
Eventually, your neighbor, like all my neighbors on my street here in beautiful Linwood, Washington, are everyone's obviously gun owners, but everyone on that same street, they're veterans, they're people who have family in the military. We're all connected. So
Right.
that's the second you let somebody's wife down or
Right.
somebody's cousin or somebody else, you're directly letting somebody else's neighbor fail. And that's just un-American. It's wrong and we shouldn't do
Right.
it.
Right. Right. It's true. It's absolutely true. Yet it's continuing to happen.
Absolutely. And it's got to stop. It's got to stop. I'm a pretty big advocate about that. And I know that one of these Master Chiefs Petty Officers of the Navy, he said recently, and it went pretty popular, lower your standards. I'm not here to lower my standards. I'm here to increase our standards and make us better. And you can't perform well as a Navy sailor if your shit at home ain't locked down.
I can't believe that they're actually advocating to lower the standards. I didn't think they could get much lower.
Oh yes, Lord, yeah. Oh my God, he's in all the memes. His wife left him over it. It was a big thing. I think it's
You
great.
have
I
to
would.
send that to me. I want to see that and show it
Oh,
to
I
my
surely
husband.
will. I promise. So, what different levels of training do you offer? You talked about some of them yesterday. What other ones do you offer?
So for me, understanding fundamentals, and I think there's a lot of people, I don't think I know. There are a lot of people that think if they just go to the range once a month and shoot a paper, that they're ready to be able to protect themselves in a high stress environment. And that is not the case whatsoever. I've had to draw my gun um, on a crazy homeless guy in Seattle. And fortunately for me, I didn't have to pull the trigger. He saw the gun and took off. So thank God. But honestly, until you're really in that situation, you really don't know what you're capable of. And it wasn't until afterward that, and I kind of laugh about it, but it's actually true because it's a natural, reaction. I didn't wet myself. And, the adrenaline dropped and I was like doing this check, right? Psychological checks, everything. And as I was getting the endorphins and things down and able to process everything logically, I realized I was going to kill that man. I was ready to kill that man. Now, side note of that, when you have that cathartic moment, it's amazing when you come to terms with how capable you are of violence, how much more peaceful you become as an individual.
Oh
um,
yeah.
we talk about that in the self-defense community a lot. It's better to be the warrior in a garden, instead of a gardener and a warrior, kind of thing. But until you're really in that situation and you realize what you are capable of, I think that we can talk about it, but it just hits different once you're there. And like I said, I didn't even have to act past draw, and I was there. I was like, whoa, I could have killed that guy. I was going to kill that guy. Like if he had continued and he had closed that triangle, and because he was close to doing it, real close to doing it, he had like 10 feet
Oh
from doing
boy.
it. Yeah, I mean, well, by the time I drew, right, because when I drew my gun, I was in my car. So when I drew my gun, he was about 25 feet. But as in that amount of time, it doesn't take much time for this to happen. Like this is quick. This stuff happens fast. And
He was closing the
by the time
distance.
I didn't hear you.
Oh, sorry. He was closing the distance on you at that
Closing
point.
it, right. And enough and so fortunately for me and him, he saw that firearm in the light, the street light that was coming in and took off. So um I want women to understand that their first class when they come and get over their fear of pulling a trigger and shooting a gun, that this is the beginning of their training, not the end. And my fundamentals course is actually 3 levels. The first one, we're in the classroom for 3-4 hours, because what's even more important than knowing how to shoot, knowing when not to, and knowing when to walk away. And so we do that, and then we go out and as we've talked about, my whole that intro fundamentals class, level 1, is very different than anything that exists out there. And then level 2 is we teach them, now they're over their fear for the most part, and so they learn how to draw from a holster. we teach them how to change magazines, as they're carrying, and clearing malfunctions. Because what I find is even after women will take the fundamentals class, if they already owned a gun or they go out and they buy one, they're still not comfortable carrying it on them every day. And so that's where that level 2 class comes in. Is okay, so we have holsters. I provide everything, because again, women want to know the hows and whys before they go out and make these purchases. So I have holsters for all of the firearms that we the female has. And we strap them up with their belts, and their belts too, everything. So, and we put those on, and then we let them draw and start learning how to do that. And of course, then that's when it's, as you know, if you shoot, that's when it kind of starts getting fun for them as well.
The
And
sexy stuff.
The sexy stuff, right? Yeah. And then then their confidence starts coming up, and so it's fun to watch them. I mean, it's scary for them still, for sure, but it's fun. And then my level 3 is we do shooting on the move, but it's not running and gunning shooting on the move. This isn't the stuff that you and I would probably, we've done. Yeah. In fact, I just went right into just running and gunning kind of stuff. And I kind of wish that I had a class like this when I first started, but which is kind of where it was birthed from. But I literally give them a command drill. And it's something to the effect of take 3 steps forward, take 2 shots, take 2 steps back, take a shot, reholster your gun. And so they're not actually walking and shooting at the same time. They're taking those steps, shooting. And what I'm doing is, obviously, I'm increasing the stress level because they have to follow the directions on top of all these layers. And it was cool because one of my students caught that after her shooting on the move class. She said, you just added another layer of stress and something I needed to focus on. And I went, exactly. Like, ding, you got it. I said, now imagine this is all happening to you while you're grocery shopping. And she was like, oh, I get it now. It kind of helped her understand it. So the fundamentals to me is those 3 levels, and with the goal, obviously, of getting them carrying that firearm every day on them so that they're ready if something were to happen.
Absolutely.
That's the core do. And then what I found, interestingly enough, and this might be one of the things that you're kind of angling at as well, is I would have women come and take a handgun all day, but they were afraid of ARs. And for all of the stuff that they heard, and that's super interesting because we still see that today, even among super pro 2A people, even women that will carry handguns or what have you. They're like, I had one woman, I said, oh, well, which I get you out shooting ARs. And she goes, oh, my husband has one of those. She goes, but I don't want to shoot. I don't want it dislocating my shoulder. And I said, honey, the LCP that you brought, the Ruger LCP that you brought, is going to be more painful to shoot than an AR. And for those that know, we call that the snapping turtle. I hate that gun. But so I said, do you trust me? And of course, her eyes got really big. And so that was a smaller class. Half the class was sick with the flu, not COVID. That time, this was last year, and so there was only 3 of them instead of 6. And I messaged my husband. I said, grab the ARs, bring the ARs out, and I had him shoot. I actually have a 5-minute video. It's on my thing. You probably saw it.
Oh yeah,
yeah. And I didn't film them, but I got I interviewed them after shooting it, and they were like, that was it. I'm like, yeah, that was it. And especially the older gal that was like, I kind of want one of those, which, by the way, great for home defense. Ladies, ARs, fantastic for women for home defense. So I created a whole class around just destigmatizing ARs for women. And there's nothing fancy to it. Literally, they come out, I teach them an overview of what the anatomy of an AR is. I mean, we don't get into the inside nitty gritty, but basically it's upper, lower barrel stock. We don't too fancy. Standard capacity magazine.
Oh yes.
30-round magazine. And the safety, and mag release, right? It's nothing charging handle, right? Nothing fancy. And then I let them just shoot them. And I have 3 different ones. They all weigh different, they have different weights and different optics and stuff. And just to give them a chance to sit and experience it. And more often than, well, every time a student, not even more often than not, every one of them, oh man, this is amazing, so it's fun to watch them get over what their preconceived ideas are. That being said, they would never do that if they didn't trust me. And it's those first classes that, especially the level 1, that very first class, that helps me develop that relationship with them where they do trust me and they know I'm not going to hurt them. And that might be one of the other videos that you found. And it wasn't an instructor. It was actually a student who was scared of the gun. And you could hear her. She's like, I'm not scared. I'm just anxious. I'm like, okay, what I want you to do
All
is just stop
right. You
and
said the word scared, so
right.
yeah.
So I want you to just stop and listen to me. Okay. It is my responsibility to keep you from getting hurt. If you do what I say and you listen carefully, you are not going to get hurt, and I will not let you fail. And it is amazing what that kind of reassurance can do for a woman who's afraid or intimidated, especially an abuse survivor, because they've been programmed to fail. Right? They've been set up for failure for so long in their lives, and then to have it be their fault, even when it's not, that to have somebody either metaphorically or literally in some cases hold their hand and reassure them that you will not let them fail is huge for their confidence. And I had one lady who, she's older, she wasn't necessarily an abusive situation like traditionally, it's just a very male dominated relationship. Older, she's in her 70s, her husband died. And I gotta tell you, I was legitimately concerned for this one because she come and taken my fundamentals class twice, and she just wasn't getting it, and like flagging it, just like, oh man, like I was stressed out. And my husband, he is my RSO, oftentimes, and um, he's just looking at me, and I mean, he was worried. But I got a message from her the other day, so she's now joined a league and she's out shooting all the time. She bought her third gun and she's talking shop with me about these guns. I'm like, what just happened?
Awesome.
And she said it was because I gave her that patience to, and really walked her through that. Even though I wasn't going to show her that, I was like, yo, man, I'm really worried about you and this gun. I'm not going to do that. Right. I'm not going to let you see that. I'm going to help you work through it and cheer on your successes and not focus on your failures. And sure enough, like she's doing some like, just weekend fun competitive stuff now. I mean, she's and it's cool. It's so
There's nothing
that's
better
what,
than those full circle moments when it
huh?
works out. Like there's nothing better than those full circle moments when it works out
Oh,
like that.
it's great. And on my Facebook page, you can see some of her comments on my Facebook page that she's left to other people when they're like mansplaining their stuff. And she's like, well, this is what I did. And it took this class for me to be able to get to this point. And I'm glad that she just she runs it down to them. And sometimes she actually knows more than the guys do when they're talking shit. So it's pretty great to see, and I love that. And that's what it's about, is seeing that shift for these
Absolutely.
women.
I love it. I love it. That's awesome. So obviously there are shows about people running guns in America, people
Mm-hmm.
illegally transporting them, Sons of Anarchy, the Mayans, you name it, right? There's a bunch of different shows that it's literally pop culture that people are illegally bringing guns into this country and that there are legal guns on the street. A lot of these crimes that I'm seeing committed, statistically speaking, are done by not the peaceful gun owners like you and myself.
Mm-hmm.
It's by people who are being re-released and prosecutors who aren't prosecuting or holding them accountable on these violent criminals that are keep reoffending. If you could say anything to someone who really believes that they need to have guns removed from the hands of people like you and myself, what would you say to positively change their mind?
I would say that they need to look at it from the perspective that this is much bigger than shall not be infringed, and the second and the right that we're guaranteed in the Constitution to be able to use to bear arms. And it wasn't just for militia; it was also to be able to defend ourselves. And actually, the SCOTUS has ruled, that was the Heller versus DC case, and they actually ruled that an individual, and Bruin just reinforced it, right, and we have a right to defend ourselves. And so when we understand that the taking the guns away from those of us that follow the law, with some of the more gun control laws that are put in place, it actually inhibits people, particularly women, from being able to protect themselves and their families. And that usually hits for people when I have those conversations, because they don't look at it that way, because all they're seeing is that myopic, shall not be infringed, NRA kind of redneck perception. And I'm an absolutionist. So I have doing the work I do, I also have a very controversial view in the industry and community, ironically, about gun ownership, because I'm an absolutionist. I believe that if a felon has served their time, they have paid their debt to society, and they should have their rights automatically restored the minute that they walk out of the jail,
Mhm.
and without having to petition for it. And I've been attacked. Oh my gosh, you should see some of the names I've been called. I've been, told, we wish your the guy that beat you would have beat you, until you lost a chromosome. I mean, just horrible stuff I've had said to me over that. And I'm like, so I find it ironic when these people shall not be infringed, and then they turn around and they say things like this. But, at the end of the day, if a felon isn't reformed, they shouldn't be let out of jail, or they should be taken out back and addressed accordingly. Looking at you, pedos.
Hell yeah.
So why are they being let out of jail? What, again, just like any other gun law, those types, preventing a felon even from having a gun once they've served their sentence, really only hurts those that are legitimately reformed from being able to defend themselves. And another uncomfortable truth that I take a lot of heat for is, the Second Amendment doesn't just apply to conservative NRA members. It is for everyone. It is a human right to be able to defend yourself and your family. We are blessed to have it guaranteed in the Constitution. And I don't have to believe in their political ideology or their lifestyle choices or whatever to be able to defend their right to own a firearm for their own protection and self-defense from others or the government, or what have you. Now, the minute that they pull up on me, it's going to be a different story, because chances are you and I are going to be better trained than most of those people that
Yes.
want to do that. But that being said, until that point comes, it's not my business to decide that, and so I've had a lot of people say, well, you want your abuser, or because they try to make it personal, right, to attack me with it, and it never goes well for them. You want abusers to have guns, you want your abuser to have a gun. And my answer simply is, it is not my decision to decide who gets to own a gun. It is not your decision to get to decide who owns a gun, who's capable of it, either legally or mentally, whatever. It is our responsibility to be better trained than those that wish to do us harm. Period. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Absolutely. I completely agree. That's what I usually say to people, like, hey, if the bad guy has a gun and you don't,
Right. Right.
You're okay with that?
Yeah. Yeah.
No one's going to save you.
Right.
Call the cops and tell them unless you tell them somebody's actively stabbing you or shooting you, or if I call the cops right now and say someone's kicking in my door, they're going to say, all right, well, all the officers are responding to other calls right now. They're usually tied up in DV cases
Right.
or shootings.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So of course, we're seeing a little bit of a shift with that, with people starting to realize that, especially people that were typically anti-gun. That being said, there's still some cognitive dissonance that they're still voting for some of these people because of the other policies and stuff. They're not kind of putting the pieces together. But that's not my problem, right? If when it comes to the time, if you're continuing to do this, that's on you. And so I'm very big on individualism. I'm a John Locke fan.
Nothing
So,
wrong with it.
huh?
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, that's what it really comes down to. It is literally black and white. It is not our responsibility to decide who is worthy of having a gun and who isn't. It's our responsibility to be better trained than those that wish to hurt us. And there's a great example of this. And if you're from up here, you probably are familiar with the company Dave's Killer Bread, right? So Dave was a felon. He was a violent felon and learned how to make bread while he was in prison, and got out, and he started this multi-million-dollar company, and he actually hires felons to help, because it's hard for felons to get jobs when they're done, which is often part. I mean, that's a whole other podcast conversation as well. The whole system and how it's actually for profit as opposed to actual genuine reform, and the real reasons that a lot of people end up back in jail. I mean, that's a whole, you and I could talk about that for hours, but this guy's out here doing legitimate work, right, to help felons stay on the right track, give them jobs, give them a chance. And like, why should a dude like that have to apply to have his rights restored? It's the whole concept of it is just absolutely silly to me. Like, it just doesn't make any sense at all. And honestly, what I really think it comes down to, because it costs thousands of dollars and attorney fees and, filing fees and all this kind of stuff. To me, it's just a money grab.
I agree.
Or felons to get their rights restored. It's or as I like to refer to it, total bullshit.
Yeah, total bullshit. I prefer total bullshit. I think it's a good answer. I think it's a good answer. So where can people find you on the socials? Obviously, your website, With a Female.
WeTheFemale.org. I would say YouTube, but honestly, I don't have a lot going on YouTube. I don't do a lot. I'm not a gun reviewer, although there is one that's up there that's interesting. It's the different. Did you see that?
Yes.
With my friend Mike, he and I had him describe a gun. I had a bunch of them I did a while back, and I had to pull them because people were just psychotic. And I didn't get to continue the series. But it was me when I very first started in the industry, reviewing a gun, basically not from a gun reviewer, but from just a mom with a gun, like mom with a gun. So I didn't know all the terminology. I didn't know all these things, and that was on purpose. It was done to be raw like that, like the way I talk to my students now.
Yeah.
And it was actually well received by people in the industry, but they weren't ready for it yet, Eddie. but I did have my friend who is a gun reviewer, and he's actually a officer in law officer in Arizona, and where he reviews that GX4, he's actually just describing the gun the way he would on his channel versus how I would talk about it with one of my students. And it was when we were done, he called me, or actually I was on a live stream, and he hopped on my live stream and he says, I just want you to know that was a very eye-opening experience for me to see the difference. He says, I think I'm talking about it in layman terms the way anybody would understand it. And he said, but to see the difference there was huge. And then I did it with, I don't know if you know who Caleb Savant is. He's one of Brownell's gunsmiths. And he and I did it. I don't know that they ever got that posted. I'll have to ask him, but with a Glock at the Brownell's booth. And I had him describe it. And then I went in and described it. And he just was like, oh, now you're right. To hear that difference is huge. And that just goes back to that classic 99% of the gun industry forget that there are only 1% of gun owners in America. And that's the dissonance. So I enjoy doing those. Those are actually fun. That's a limited run, right? At some point, people are going to start seeing them and notice it, because I don't want people that I do those with. I don't want them to watch the other videos first, because I want I don't want them altering how they're going to describe a gun. They're in the industry. But that one was fun. So anyway, that's on there. But Instagram, you can find me @WeTheFemale_official. Stilettos and Shotguns 3.0. If you like things a little spicy, it's 3.0 for a reason. My first, which was the one that went viral, actually was taken down at 18,000 followers, and the second one just earlier this year, actually about 3 months ago, was taken down at 12.5 thousand. So that's my Stilettos and Shotguns, all spelled out. 3.0, We the Female, and then I'm We the Female on Facebook and on Stilettos and Shotguns as well on Facebook, and then I'm on Twitter at @thereal_S.
Right. Well, I will make sure to put all those links in the description as well.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right.
Okay. So leaving an abuser isn't like the movies where, for most women, it's not as cut and dry as, she gets beat up and she just takes off. And, there's usually a lot that is involved with it, especially if she's in a very serious situation, she has to plan and escape. But for me, I'd had weight loss surgery. I used to weigh almost 300 pounds. And
I could never tell.
Yeah, I weighed 270 pounds when I gave birth to my daughter, and I weighed about 260 afterwards. So that was a struggle for him, the attention and things that I was getting. So that kind of escalated the situation. And he had hit me once in the beginning of our marriage, and I said, if you ever do that again, you are going to jail. So it had been years, and this is how this happens, right? I mean, it's they don't just start hitting you, and it's usually psychological, or something like my case happened. It happened once, and then it won't happen again for years in some cases, and they go through this honeymoon phase. There's a whole cycle to this. But anyway, in my situation, things had started escalating. I was really getting to the point where I couldn't take it anymore, but he was yelling at me and throwing stuff at me, and my daughter who was 3. She was 3 at the time. I'd come back in and I was trying to wipe my face from crying so she wouldn't see it. And she gets up on her little toddler legs and she runs into the bathroom and grabs some toilet paper and brings it out and hands it to me. And she says, "What did daddy say that hurt you, mommy?" And that was it. That was it. I no more, no mas. You know what I mean? That was it. So I spent the next 6 months laying low and saving money until I was in a position where I could get out. And I did. And we were getting along, well for our daughter at that point. And he had come to my house on Thanksgiving, my condo that I had purchased, and got drunk. And on top of being drunk, I did not know this at that time, but he was on bipolar meds. And if you know anything about that, those are two things that definitely don't mix. And he thought that I had lost, or was intentionally, he thought I was intentionally hiding his keys from him to keep him there. And so he just kept beating on me for hours. Well, my daughter actually listened to it in the bed. She was laying in bed and heard it. Fortunately, she didn't come out. How sad is that? That's what I'm lucky to, for her. But so I was already out of the situation when mine, when the tipping point moment happened, and I called the cops, and this put all this into play. And so I already had my own space in my own home, and that's unfortunately not the case for a lot of victims. It's okay. My daughter's fine. she's hell on wheels at Oregon State. She skipped her senior year of high school, and she's studying some sort of STEM research and picks up dead bugs off of farms now. We were fortunate that he exited our life when I met my husband. He obviously struggled with that. And there's some things that happened with my daughter, nothing sexual or anything like that. That wasn't his game. It was just control and weird stuff, more over me than her. But he just essentially exited her life, which happens a lot. And really that's because he couldn't use her to control me. Which was the best thing that ever happened to her. And then my husband has been an amazing, that is her father. I mean, in fact, they look alike. Most people, they would assume that I would be the step parent in that relationship, especially when she was little. So she had a very strong father figure, and she's very successful in school, and she's doing great. And she gets a little anxious, but I think most kids nowadays have anxiety issues, and stuff. So, I don't talk about that a lot because I don't want it to, upset people, because it can be upsetting to hear. But it's amazing. The reason I went ahead and shared that, and part of the reason why I think it would be good for people to hear that is, and I talk about this in my classes, and I know you heard this in the class, is that when I talked about that grandma that said that she couldn't shoot anybody, and I said, well, what if it was your grandchildren? And she was so passionate in that moment. She goes, well, I would have shot him. And I said, would you? Why wouldn't you do that to protect yourself so you could be there next time for your grandchildren? It changed that perception, right? So for me in that situation, it took my daughter, knowing that my daughter was seeing this. And I mean, we know it, right? I mean, we really know. I mean, we study abuse and think, that this is the case. But for her, or excuse me, for me in that situation, it took that moment for me to realize it was tangible. She was experiencing this and it was impacting her, and she was trying to protect me. And that was it. So sometimes what it really does take is our children to push us into motion before we'll do something for ourselves, especially for women, I think. More, not, listen, hater men out there, just calm your ball sacks, right? I'm not, yes, fathers can be like that too. But I'm telling you, and if you're comfortable in your masculinity, this hits different with moms. It just does. There's a reason there are adages like the mama bear instinct and that whole there. Like it is scientifically proven that we are biologically wired differently once we become moms to be protectors. And in that case, that was what for me is what was the impetus to really make the decision to go, I need to I need to change this because and at the end of the day, it's because I didn't want her with somebody that was going to treat her that way.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, there's so much to unpack there. I often talk about full circle moments, and
Yeah.
if that was a moment that happened to me, I wouldn't know what to do. I
Yeah.
don't have the tools to work through that. But
Yeah.
listening to you talk about something that was as devastating as that, hopefully it definitely changed my perspective. I'm going to say that. And one, thank you for sharing. Two, it's never easy to talk about things you've experienced, and talking through trauma is another reason why I started this podcast, so that people stop feeling like they don't have other resources, or that other people haven't experienced these things, because we
Yeah.
have. There's other people out here who are survivors. Thank
Yeah.
you so much for sharing that.
My pleasure. And, on that note, and, if you reach to people that are, not just in the gun world or whatever, more traumatic, understand that I want to make sure that I'm validating some of those female listeners that you may have, or even some of the male listeners that are trying to learn more about domestic violence. Oftentimes, if they're not just physically abused, they're sexually abused as well, by their partners. And that particular one thing I do not talk about, I've tapped on it, just like I'm going to here. And there's many reasons why. That tipping point when he was in my home on Thanksgiving and beat the hell out of me, there was very aggressive sexual assault that happened as well. And I don't talk about it a lot. One, I just don't feel like people need to know about it in detail. Because there's a lot of stuff that goes along with it, but also I think that there's a lot of very relevant voices around sexual assault and self-defense that can carry that torch, and I don't need to. So, but it was there was some pretty rough stuff and some things he said that were pretty humiliating. And I mean, I would share if somebody really wanted to know. I mean, I'm not embarrassed by it, but it can really hit for people, and so sometimes it's just best to just leave it at where it is.
Absolutely. And I would
Especially if my
obviously
daughter would
never.
ever come across any of these things.
Yeah, and obviously I'm never gonna ask you to share anything you don't want to share.
Yeah,
It's a
well,
privilege to have you here and share that.
thank you, thank you. And I hope that just even sharing that can help some people kind of understand that it's rarely just physical abuse, that there's usually some component of sexual abuse along, or in some capacity, along with physical abuse in a domestic partner relationship as well.
Yeah, and it is a damn shame that it happens. It really is.
Yeah.
It's definitely affected my family. It's affected my friends. It's affected people that I used to have relationships with that are not friends with anymore. And
Yeah.
I still try to reach out to them and offer them resources. It's never an easy thing to hear that somebody's been hurt in a way that is not like, it's not like a physical fight saying, hey, I can hit you, you can hit me back. It's completely
Right.
it's an assault on their personality, their
Right.
character, their soul. And in
Right.
front of children, it's absolutely horrible. I've watched it
Yeah.
happen in front of me as a child, and it's going to stick with me forever. So
Yeah.
thank you
Yeah.
for like, honestly, thank you so much for telling me about that, and for taking
Yeah.
time out of your day. You're such a busy woman. Oh my goodness. You do a lot for the world. So thank you so much for joining me on this. And I'm definitely going to post all your links in the description. I appreciate you taking time out of your day. I appreciate the class you put on. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
all the nonprofit work you do.
Thank you.
I really do encourage people to donate to your great cause and great purpose and
Thank you.
this mission that you're on.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I don't get paid for this. I just, I'm blessed to be in a position financially where I don't have to. So every dime goes into, helping to women. And, I guess one thing I didn't even mention, I forgot. My organization has so many, ways that we work with women. We also, any donations that come in, we fund, training for women that can't afford it. So domestic violence survivors, sexual assault survivors, single mothers that can't afford it, we provide training for them. We've provided $500 for 5 women to get hand-to-hand combatives training, urban combatives training in Atlanta for a month. We've paid $1,000 to a firearms instructor to train 10 women in Philly. We sent a single mother and her children to a 3-day emergency preparedness weekend. So it encompassed self-defense, but also how to like filter water and, be able to protect themselves in case of an emergency. So we don't ever be afraid to reach out to us. If you want to train with us, you want to receive education, but you can't afford it. We have people that donate to us that are generous to help women that can't afford their training. Nobody should ever be denied the right of self-defense, period. They especially shouldn't be denied the right of self-defense because they can't afford it. And that is particularly important for abuse survivors and women in general.
I
And
love it.
that's part of what we do as well, is to make sure that these women are never denied the right of self-defense or learning how to defend themselves due to financial crisis.
I absolutely love that. That is whoo, that definitely hits home for me. There's a lot of people I'm gonna be sending your way. My wife wants to do a class with a bunch of her friends. I've been talking about this nonstop since I left Bremerton on the hour and a half drive. I was badgering my wife. I was talking to random people. I talked to my MRI people today at the doctor's office about you, and they're like, "Oh my goodness!" They were looking you up and like, "Wow, it's an important thing you're doing. You're honestly doing the Lord's work." And uh, I don't think there's enough of this in the world. So thank you so much for joining me today. This has been another episode of Off the Deep End, and make sure to check her out at the links posted in the description. I don't feel right just leaving this episode up as it is. So I'm going to put a little bit of a footnote in there. You might call it that. Domestic violence is something that has affected my family. It's affected my friends. It's affected the women and men in my life. And I want to put out a special thank you to anyone who has experienced abuse, whether it be physical or not, in the past. And I want to let you know that I do appreciate from the bottom of my heart you not just listening to this, but all the people that share this, the people who put this on Facebook and say, listen to this if you're going through a hard time or not. And more importantly, thank you to all the survivors for just still being here. Suicide doesn't just affect vets. Suicide doesn't just affect men. Suicide doesn't mean you're a statistic, and doesn't mean you're just going to be one number added to the numbers of that day. Suicide, self-harm, not feeling like you're good enough, all these things are tied into this crazy thing called life. And without you in it, for me, for the people around you, it wouldn't be the same. Thank you for listening to another episode of Off the Deep End, and I appreciate you being here.